say like a mid-sized city,
Yeah.
they're going to be picking up still, depending on the carrier, maybe 100 or a couple hundred shipments a day, if not more. And that's probably going to be going all over the country. But that terminal in a mid-size or small town is not going to have enough freight to load an entire trailer going up to Kansas City or Salt Lake, right? So as it leaves their neck of the woods, they're going to be putting stuff on that trailer that's headed in the right direction, hopefully, but it's not all staying on there till the end. So they need to load the trailer in the reverse order of how that trailer is going to be routed across the country, so that when they hit the first terminal, they open it up and maybe they pull off 3 shipments that either get delivered there locally or get diverted slightly to another place. And then the rest is just left on, and they can just backfill it with whatever they have to add to it. And then away it goes down the road.
Welcome to the ThinkFreight Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Wardine, and it's my pleasure to announce today's guest, Curtis Garrett. He's the founder of Understand LTL and the Senior Vice President of LTL at FreightPlus. Curtis, welcome to ThinkFreight Podcast. Thanks for coming on today, man.
Thank you so much, man. Happy to be here.
I really appreciate it. I'm pumped to, I know you're going to also be at the Manifest event. I'm pumped to see you there in 2024. That's happening in February. But, we kind of want to dive right into like you and your background. Because I think you have a kind of an interesting story and how you kind of got to where you're at today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of from college and how you got to kind of where you are today and what you're doing with Understand LTL.
Yeah, on paper, I'm nobody that ever should have got to where I am today. So it is pretty interesting. I've made a lot of right turns and swam upstream and taken demotions and lateral moves. And really, the theme with all of that over the past 16 years now has just been doing what interested me, chasing kind of what was exciting. I get bored easy sometimes with certain roles and certain jobs when I kind of figure it out and master it.
Yeah.
So I really just fell into the industry. Literally, knew somebody that was working at Old Dominion Freight Line in Columbus, Ohio, back in 2007, and started there while still going to school for business. And I remember my first night, I was told by the guy that trained me, he's like, nobody ever leaves this place. Everybody comes in with plans to be short term and just make some money or, do what you need to do. But the industry gets a hold of you, and kind of the volatility and excitement and ups and downs. And it's a pretty good way to make a living, whether you're a driver or you work in dock operations or mechanic or what have you. So I was like, no way, I'm going to be the one guy that leaves. And he was right and I was right, because I didn't stay in that terminal for that company, but I'm definitely still in the industry. So just started there on the dock, learned how to drive a forklift and loaded trailers for a year, and moved into like a dock, what they call like a lead man dock role. Then I left for a bit during the recession, and then I came back and did a driving school and was trained on being a line haul and a pickup and delivery P&D driver. Did that for about a year, and then saw an opportunity in the weights and research group, which is kind of one foot in operations and then one foot in the pricing and business side of things.
Okay.
And that department is literally out there in the field, 1 to 4 people at each terminal, depending on how big it is, how much freight it has moving through. And you're just walking around inspecting freight, measuring freight, making sure that, what is physically moving and what's written on the bill of lading, which drives how the customer's charged. First of all, is accurate and true. And then second, matches with how their pricing program is built. Because typically in LTL, you build the pricing up front based on whatever shipment data that customer can provide. And then quite often that pricing rides for an entire year. So if things change, or if the data was wrong or incomplete, it helps to have kind of these nodes out there in the field by way of this W&R department, and they're just kind of checking and making sure that stuff's aligned. So really enjoyed that. And that kind of got me started down the pricing and yield and costing channel. Eventually moved to North Carolina, where I still am, but I came down here to work in the pricing and costing group. And then 2016 started looking around and just realizing that, I could be happy at Old Dominion and do well over years and years, but I wanted something more quicker, and kind of always had the innovative entrepreneurial spirit, I guess, even though I may not have always known what it was, but it was definitely there. So
yeah,
jumped out into
I was going to ask you about that, because it's always interesting when, I talk to a lot of like founders like yourself, and it's always just so interesting, like asking them, when did you know, or like, how did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Because I knew like very early on, like my grandfather owned his own company. He kind of had his own schedule. We were able to like go do things during the day. He was his own boss, and he was also in the fuel side of trucking. So I've kind of always been around it. And I always kind of knew it from like a really young age, like I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I never knew like what that was, right? Like from a young age, it was like lemonade stands, trying to do stuff like that. Then it was like doing lawn mowing, power washing. But eventually I didn't want to just be like on the service side and just be like breaking my back doing those things, or like hiring out for landscaping stuff. It wasn't what I really enjoyed. So it was like once I got into the freight side, it was really interesting. So like like when did you kind of know? Was it kind of like early on, or was it kind of like later on, like in your mid-20s, early 30s, that you kind of knew like I wanted to do something on my own?
Yeah, it's super interesting to hear everyone's experience. I'm still figuring it out. I'm still realizing
Definitely.
now, I guess. Like
Yeah.
I don't have a clear, I've heard so many people's stories. Like I was going around selling pine cones in the neighborhood at age 5, or like I don't. I mean,
Right.
I did normal kid stuff. I did some lemonade stands. I mowed some lawns.
Yep.
I lived in Canada, so I shoveled some snow.
Oh yeah.
Um, and but it wasn't like, how can I monetize this? How can I make money? It was more just, how can I stay busy and make people
Yeah.
happy and help them out and like solve some problems. So
Yeah.
I think that still was a different form of like the entrepreneurial mind, but it wasn't. I didn't grow up surrounded by business owners. My dad actually did have his own business, but it was in construction, and
Okay.
it was like, that was just normal to me. Like, he
Yeah.
worked long and hard, and it wasn't different to me as a kid whether he owned the company or he worked for somebody. So
Yeah.
nowadays, like, my kids are seeing I work from home. We can take the occasional family trip, and I'll work from wherever we are as a family. And like, there's a lot more flexibility, especially as you build out more leverage and you've got products and, assets and tools out there working for you.
Exactly.
So you're not always on. But yeah, for me as a kid, it was just kind of like, I'll just grow up, go to school like everybody else, get a job. I had an uncle that was like one of my heroes, and he went really far with his education and ended up going to Yale and did a PhD
Wow.
and became a professor. So like, that was always honestly one of my pipe dreams was be
Like
really
that
well
path.
educated and hang out in libraries and do that. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. And then basically I left Old Dominion and I blinked. And from 2016 until today, it's been a blur, but I've done a lot and experienced a lot, and got to try a lot of different things. So I've been in that time span, I've been with 3 different managed trans providers,
Hmm.
done a lot of just random consulting on my own with shippers and 3PLs and carriers and technology companies. I remember, I think it was last year, when I got paid by an LTL carrier for something I did. That was like the closed loop. Like I'd been paid
Right.
by everybody in the industry, every part of the industry. So
That's cool.
that was kind of cool to think that I can provide value to multiple parties in the market. Um, yeah, Understand LTL is kind of taken off. We've got this event coming up in a few weeks, which is like a
Hell
smallish
yeah.
mastermind event. Um, Working on the second course, doing had a short partnership and did some on-site training with the NMFTA, which is like one of
Oh, that's awesome.
the OG LTL organizations. Just actually kind of verbally uh, figured out a deal this morning to do training for one of the carriers and their new salespeople.
Oh,
So
that's
I'll be
cool.
announcing that at some point. But yeah, it's just kind of like it's a brand, it's training, but it's also community, and I think it's everything that I do with Understand LTL will be for the betterment of the industry, and so I hope that everybody that sees that can kind of get behind it, and it can just be an innovation lab and a safe spot for people to brainstorm and work together.
I love that. We're going to touch more on your event here shortly because I want to highlight that. But you've been in LTL for so long, and you had mentioned you get bored kind of easily. So why have you stuck around in LTL? Like, is it just kind of utilizing that knowledge you have, or is it just there's so many different facets to LTL that it just kind of keeps you entertained?
Yeah, there's so many facets to it. It scratches all the itches. Like, I love numbers. I love maps. I love,
Mm,
economics, geography, like all these very, basically, if you can quantify something that's happening in the real world, then that really interests me. Whether it's like behavioral economics and why people or companies do the things they do, or, spatial like math problems, like how, all the different parts and pieces of freight and how does that
mm.
fit well into a trailer. It's just all super interesting, and it's
So
dynamic, and it never is the same. So that's
so
my
you
like anchor, I guess. But then I've been getting into design, graphic design here, because I've
okay.
done all this stuff for my Understand LTL course and content.
So you've done all that yourself.
Yeah, so far.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So so touching on like why you stayed. So if like a lot of those same factors you can get like in the truckload side, right? So like why like is there a specific thing that you really love about LTL? Like I know for me, I was a big produce, like I loved moving reefer produce. It was always like what I biggest my biggest niche was like watermelons, garlic, moving things like that. And I really enjoyed whether, whether I was moving that, like a lot of it was 1 to 3 stop, and that's like the stuff I really enjoyed was the multi-pick, multi-drop. Like it really just kept me it kept me going. So I can kind of feel like that's kind of the same feeling you kind of had, like where when LTL, there's just so many moving pieces and there's so many things that can go right, so many things can go wrong, and you can really just kind of um, set your expectations to whatever it may be depending on the carrier and the day, right? Like it's just it's so up and down, the ebbs and flows of it are so crazy. So I think it's just interesting to see like why I didn't like LTL so much. I'll just be honest. It was always to me like it was weird. It was hard. It was I knew there was going to end up being probably extra charges that my customer was going to complain about, or I was going to end up eating on the broker side. So it was always like, interesting to me, all the people that loved LTL so much.
Yeah, it's tough to explain. Like, they're so different. LTL
Yeah.
is more like the airline industry than it is truckload. It's
That's interesting.
very like there's all these systems and all these variables that are just working together and all these moving parts, and some of them get pretty granular, but they all make sense. Like, there is a science to it, and it can all be figured out with numbers. So
Hmm.
where people get tripped up is just whether it's the wrong incentives, or you're just looking at one side of the equation, like, just, hey, can I get the lowest price, and how do I do that?
Yeah.
That's where it can go wrong. But yeah, to answer your question, it's a bunch of reasons like why I've stuck with it. I've stayed around long enough. I feel a sense of ownership now. like I have skin in the game
Definitely.
in the industry. That's how I feel. Like I,
Hmm.
you know, I think about the LTL industry like my favorite sports league, and like every carrier is a
Yeah,
team, and
I
I
get
just
that.
love the brands and the technology and a lot of the, you know, most of the people, and like I don't know, it's just weird. I just see the world. I literally see everything through and bring, you know, translate everything back to LTL. So
Hmm.
yeah, but it's
I
cool
love
that I
that.
have a lot of other interests, you know, like I mentioned, psychology and behavioral economics and physical stuff and sports and
Definitely.
neuroscience, and like all those things are still applicable
Oh yeah.
in the day-to-day LTL, you know, life. So it's where I am, and I think at this point, you know, I like it. I've got a lot of credit built up that's compounding with, you know, with a platform that I've built and with a lot of good relationships and a lot of experience, and I kind of reached that point, I guess, where I have like an extreme confidence in anything LTL, and
Hmm.
that's a good feeling to have. Like
Definitely.
if you're still progressing, you haven't plateaued, you know, and you just are waking up every day from a spot of like what I'm doing matters, and I like what I do in this industry, and I like who I do it with. There's just no reason for me to look anywhere else.
I love that, man. I definitely do. And let's tie this into something I think it's interesting and something I was talking about when I said I thought LTL was like hard and weird and tough to do. Right. I think a lot of people kind of feel that way, especially if they've been on like the full truckload side or they've never worked in LTL. So how does LTL work? Like I know we've touched on it a little bit. Like we don't have to get super granular, but like how does it work on some of these? You know, I guess processes when I'm submitting bids to have my LTL picked up, right? If I've got a customer as a broker, um, like how can I guess, understand LTL a little bit better and kind of make some of those, um, I guess, decisions to help my customer, but also add maybe a new service or take on some new opportunities in the market.
Yeah, I mean the biggest difference, I think, excuse me, the biggest difference in strategy and just understanding it is in truckload. Like it's typically one to one, right? You have a load, you need to
Yeah,
cover it, you need to find either the right carrier or broker or whatever, and all that work and everything's kind of done on the front end, and then once the right carrier has the load at the right price, it's typically pretty smooth from that point. Where
yeah.
LTL is the opposite. It's you just enter some zip codes, a weight, and a freight class. If you can figure that out, you get an instant rate on a screen. And these companies are all big enough that, or most of them, you know, that you submit a pickup request electronically. There's not typically a phone call unless you want to. And I would say 7 or 8 times out of 10, the carrier's just going to be there and pick it up and not miss it.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like flipped. Like LTL's seemingly easy on the front end, and then where stuff goes wrong with invoice discrepancies and reways and, you know, late deliveries, that typically happens after it's been picked up. So that's
Hmm.
one just switch or shift, I guess, in how to approach it. That it just helps if you're aware of that. But then again, like back to the one to one aspect of truckload, LTL doesn't work well when you just literally live a shipment at a time. And that's why
Mm,
like transactional blanket pricing and brokerage stuff is always more painful because
that makes
you're
sense.
focused on like what's my margin on this shipment? What's, you know, it's always a shipment at a time. The whole point of LTL is it's a network. It wouldn't
Mm,
exist if it weren't a massive network business model with, you know, tens of thousands of shipments per carrier, at least on the larger carriers, moving throughout the country, sharing, you know, lanes and all these strategically placed facilities and equipment flowing around the country. So if you can
yeah.
sit back and think of it if you're just quoting single shipment at a time, trying to win a shipment instead of looking at it from an account level at the very least, or even beyond that, like a whole, book of business or a whole group of accounts. The bigger you can look at LTL and kind of play it like a chessboard, as opposed to just zooming into that one shipment and living a shipment at a time. Like, broadly speaking, that's how you win, I think, at LTL.
So LTL really sounds like it's really, I mean, kind of like truckload in a way, but it's really a volume game. Is that correct? Like if I've got a lot of volume, at the right size and things like that, I can probably have a greater discount going directly with an LTL provider, or unless I guess it kind of depends on the amount of freight, right? If I'm moving 2 loads a week, I'm probably not going to get the same level of cost savings and cost reduction as someone who's moving 500 pallets a week, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a big part of it. I think the laws of supply and demand are in every single industry. But there's other drivers of cost in LTL. So like, volume is one of them. And what that does, it reduces pickup and delivery cost. Like if you think an LTL trailer, or sorry, truck and trailer and driver cost the same, relatively the same, whether they're going to a customer to pick up one pallet or they're going and filling up, right? It's generally the same. Maybe incrementally more fuel if they're full and have a heavier load, and then obviously they're going to be there a little bit longer too. So it's more of a time aspect, but definitely, generally speaking, they're driving there, they're filling up, they're coming back to the terminal or going to the next spot. And so when that pickup cost can be shared across 15 or 20 pallets that are all generating revenue versus the one pallet, it just reduces, it's more of an efficiency of scale on the pickup side. And same with delivery. Carriers would rather have multi-shipment deliveries instead of just single shipment deliveries, like go into one business, take off one pallet or one shipment or what have you. So that's where volume really helps. But outside of that, like on the line haul side, it's more about density of the freight and space in the trailer. Space is also a huge driver of LTL cost. So I've always said space, time, and risk. Time is like, time spent at pickup, delivery, cross-docking. If you have, loose pieces or freight that's hard to handle, it's just going to take more time on the dock. Residential deliveries take more time typically than just a in and out, industrial building. And then risk is obviously packaging and bad credit or financial risk or claims risks. Like most LTL carrier costs roll up to those three things. So that's where packaging and density and like reducing the footprint of your freight really helps a lot with your pricing on the longer haul, like line haul portion of it, which is after it gets picked up, it's consolidated with a whole bunch of other freight going to a similar spot, traveling however far it needs to travel, depending on where it's going. Right. And then is again deconstructed. I guess that's not the opposite. Whatever the opposite of consolidated is, deconsolidated,
deconsolidation,
and delivered out. Right. So that line haul piece, which if you're talking like Atlanta to Salt Lake, it may go through 2 or 3 or 4 terminals on the way, depending on the carrier and their network. It may get left on and just added to, or it may get cross-docked and reconsolidated on another trailer. So
interesting.
That part there, the line haul is the biggest portion of cost for LTL carriers. Just from fuel consumption, from driver pay, they pay their line haul drivers typically more than their local drivers. Just from wear and tear and maintenance from the equipment. So if you can reduce the amount of space you're taking up in their trailer, then you're going to get better pricing no matter what.
Yeah, that definitely makes a ton of sense. And you answered a question I was alluding, or I was going to ask next. You must have just been getting my telepathy vibes there. I was going to ask you, like, if something was going from like you said, Atlanta to Salt Lake or Salt Lake to Atlanta, it's going to touch like 4 terminals, and that was something I was kind of curious about because it's, if you think about it on the truckload side, it's going from Atlanta to Salt Lake in maybe 2.5 days, and when you say it's touching 4 different terminals on LTL, how long is that transit time generally from say Atlanta to Salt Lake, that same scenario? How long is that transit time generally between kind of any carriers you select?
It really comes down to how well the line haul network of each carrier is built out, and where they have hubs, where they run more freight through to consolidate, as well as how well they're loading. So
Okay.
think of like Atlanta's probably a bad example because it's such a big market, but say like a mid-sized city,
Yeah.
they're going to be picking up still, depending on the carrier, maybe 100 or a couple hundred shipments a day, if not more. And that's
Mm,
probably going to be going all over the country. But that terminal in a mid-size or small town is not going to have enough freight to load an entire trailer going up to Kansas
right.
City or Salt Lake,
Yeah.
right? So as it leaves their neck of the woods, they're going to be putting stuff on that trailer that's headed in the right direction, hopefully, but it's not all staying on there till the end. So they need to load the
Okay.
trailer in the reverse order of how that trailer is going to be routed across the country, so that when they hit the first terminal, they open it up and maybe they pull off 3 shipments that either get delivered there locally or get diverted slightly to another place, and then the rest is just left on, and they can just backfill it with whatever they have to add to it, and then away it goes down the road. So that's a lot more
Mm.
efficient because there's just less freight to process in the way of unloading and cross docking and reloading again. Plus, then it's handled less, it's touched less, and there's way less chance of claims. So
That makes sense because it's basically like you're taking a bunch. You're basically just consolidating everything and saying, hey, if this is all going to Salt Lake, and I'll just kind of say, we'll just kind of use a mid market example. But if that's all going to Salt Lake, they can basically take anything that's going west and shove it onto a trailer to their next hub, and then all of that freight can get reconsolidated to going to wherever it's going. So if you have other freight
yep.
that's going further south, that can continue going further south. If anything going west can go further west. So that's pretty interesting. And so if on a general point, so like if you're talking like Old Dominion or Estes freight lines, what is that time from like a Atlanta terminal, or like a mid market, like a Chattanooga style terminal, going west? What does that time frame generally look like?
Generally, if you say like the southeast or just the east coast, like east of the Mississippi, going out
Yeah,
west, it's probably going to be like 4 to 6 days, depending on
that's
the
not
carrier.
terrible. Yeah,
And then OD and I just saw XPO announce this as well. They run some teams as well. So if
interesting.
they
Okay.
if they can load up enough freight in Atlanta that just needs to go all the way across the country to like Rialto, California or Denver or something, they will load it up. And if they have a team there, they'll just send them straight across the country.
Hmm,
So that helps their
that's
long
cool.
haul cross country mileage or transit times. The other thing they do
Yeah.
is a lot of meet and turns. So, and I used to do this as a driver. So I would leave out of
Hmm.
Columbus, Ohio, drive, 500-600 miles, meet somebody halfway that came from Atlanta. We'd swap trailers and then take them back.
Go back.
So that's how
Hmm.
you cover a lot of ground in a single night without having to actually send it through a facility and have it worked again. It's just they're
Swap
linking
and go.
together longer runs by having the meet and turns.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and there's a lot of just efficiency tricks like that, to keep freight moving like that. That's the name of LTL. Like just keep it moving in the right direction. Keep your trailers full. Maximize trailer cube. I remember what else. Another thing. That's why a lot of them use the pup trailers, the little 28
Hmm.
footers, because it's more modularized, right? So you can
That makes
have,
sense.
you can mix and match. So I might be coming out of Chattanooga and be pulling, one trailer of Kansas City freight and one trailer of Chicago freight, and I take them both to Atlanta, and then that set gets broken and reassigned to different drivers there. So I might lose my Chicago trailer, it gets taken up the road by somebody else, but then I'm given, a second Kansas City that matches with my first. So
Makes sense.
it's like an algorithm, right? Like the best line haul algorithm wins as far as carrier to carrier.
That's very interesting, and I want to switch directions a little bit, and talk about Estes and their hack. They just announced, I think it was Monday or yesterday, that like they're fully back online. No more issues with the cybersecurity hack that they had. What happened? What happened there? And how should carriers, I guess, like look to improve their cybersecurity? Like this is becoming more and more prevalent, especially I'm sure you're aware and know about a lot of the freight theft that's going on, double brokers. So it's just another one of those methods that some of the higher cyber criminals have. What happened there, and kind of what should carriers, on the bigger level, but also smaller carriers do to improve some of their cybersecurity? On what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. So first of all, they're just, as of yesterday, I believe they're fully back online. So that makes it something like just over 3 weeks, I believe.
Yeah, that's a long time.
They were operational the whole time, but they were running dark essentially, and not up to full capabilities, full capacity. So yeah, kudos to them. First of all, they clawed their way back. It I don't think anyone outside of the leadership team knows exactly what happened, but they did say it was like a ransom type situation where they were hacked. And I know this happened in the past 3 to 5 years with a bunch of other carriers: Forward Air, Pitt, Ohio, Oak Harbor, small Pacific Northwest carrier, just in the last month or two, and probably more than I'm forgetting. And then a lot of forwarders, expediters got hit a couple of years ago. It's gotten pretty prevalent. So the trick is, I guess, somebody gets in, they lock everything down, and then they drag you down literally like to the dark web and say, come give your money here and we'll give you the key back, basically. So I'd love to hear the background story, but
me too. I mean, I'm just gonna, I have no information, obviously, and you don't have. We all have about the same amount of information. I'm assuming it was probably some kind of phishing attack on a lower level employee that had access to the systems and clicked something that they weren't supposed to in an email, and Estes went down for 3 weeks. Well, went dark for 3 weeks, or a week and a half, and then took another week and a half to get fully operational. But that's kind of like what my thought is in every organization I've been at, I've been a prime target for some of these phishing attacks. So I'm almost assuming that that's kind of what happened, but obviously we'll never really know until they decide to disclose. I'm sure they never will, because it's
probably not.
It's not a good look, and it's embarrassing. I mean, it happens, but it's also it's embarrassing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard different experts weigh in, and I've heard everything from like it's basically just cost doing business in 2023, like it's going to happen, to like the NMFTA is really focusing on cybersecurity, and they just did a conference this week, so that was interesting timing to be able to have a bunch of experts get together and talk about something that
what happened. Yeah,
big case study. But yeah, I mean, we all know that trucking companies are behind the 8 ball when it comes to technology in a lot of ways. And I mean, you've got these, the top 10 LTL carriers, where a lot of them are public companies, and they've got, they're anywhere from $9 to $1 billion in revenue, and they're pretty far along, and they have quite a bit in the way of securities. But I mean, Estes is number 3 or 4 as far as the largest. Yeah, I don't know. not a good thing for the industry, obviously, right after Yellow closing and just all the chaos and turmoil and everything, that was still getting cleaned up from that. So kind of
Yeah.
weird to have like two big black swan events happen that close together, where the impact of each of those events is more like a every 10 years kind of.
Right.
So yeah, really interesting. It's been a fun 2023 in LTL.
It's been, the whole market's just been interesting from, now Convoy going down to Yellow, this Estes attack. There's been so many interesting things happening in the markets. Let's switch gears just a little bit to kind of something you just touched on was Yellow. Their terminals are up for grabs. Those are, dock doors are really like they're very needed in LTL, right? So who do you think ends up with these terminals, or do you think that these all their terminals end up getting split up amongst multiple buyers?
Yeah, I think that'll happen.
Yeah.
You're right, though. It's whoever owns the most strategically placed dock doors wins, basically in the end. So I think most people know at this point, Yellow only owned like less than half of the terminals they were in as of the day
Yeah,
they
I
went
think
under.
it was like 162 terminals they owned out of like the 337 or something like
Yeah,
that.
something like that. And then they had actually sold one or two off just in the couple of months prior to closing.
Yeah.
This
And
initial,
those were pretty good, like pretty big sized and good terminals. Like I know one of them was in Compton that wasn't like
yeah,
the best in terms of size and scale, but the value in the land was really like it was in like you said the strategic positioning of it. So those were two terminals that they kind of let go at the end to try and make to try and last a little bit longer essentially. But
right.
yeah, sorry, I'll let you keep keep talking about docs.
No, I'm glad you brought up the Compton one. That sold for a lot of multiples, versus what it was, I guess, on their books as far as value. So that's, I think, why so many companies are interested. There's been like stages of this thing as it's since they closed the doors, locked the gates. You had all these big financial companies vying to basically give them debtor financing and kind of be the
Yeah.
ones that help them wind things down, because I think everybody saw quickly like they are worth more dead than they were alive. And even
Yeah.
if you're just taking like face value for what these assets and this real estate is sitting on their books at, they're still going to pay off all their debt and have
Mhm.
money to spare, but it's not going to go for that. It's going to go for multiples. And that Compton terminal was a good example.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that Compton terminal was like on their books for like 3 or 5, $7 million, and it sold for like 80 million,
Yeah.
90 million, like something like that. So people know that the value of their real estate and what they had value, like it was very low, and a lot of the terminals they bought or had, um, I guess consolidated with buying a lot of the companies that they did, you know, um, they were purchased a long time ago. They weren't things that they were turning around flipping, and they weren't really being very towards the end they were trying to integrate a lot of those terminals with their one yellow approach. But why do you think it really, like, why do you think that they failed at integrating a lot of these dual terminals that they had? Like they had some terminals in some cities that were 5 miles apart, that were, one was a yellow terminal, one was a YRC terminal. So it was like, why do you think that they failed at integrating some of these terminals and not getting rid of, I guess, some of the excess terminals?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answer necessarily. My opinion on some of it, and I wasn't around when all these. I think it was Bill Zollers that was making all these acquisitions during his time as Yellow CEO.
Yeah.
The Roadway and Yellow merger, the acquisition of the USF companies, your Redaway, your Holland, New Penn. it was just a lot of like money flying around and a lot of companies being acquired quickly in order to get bigger quick, but a lot of redundancy with assets and real estate. I think they had 700 to 800 terminals at one point when they were all consolidated. Wow. And then, like you said, right before they went out, was down low 300s. So they had already sold off a ton in the last 15, 20 years. And I think that final, the other big variable and what was the final nail in the coffin was just that union, bottleneck. I guess it's hard to pivot and innovate and do things that your leadership thinks will make your company survive or just be better if you have to get it approved by a union every time. And I don't know, I'm not a union expert. I'm not a historical expert on LTL, but I just it's plain to see at this point the non-union companies in today's day and age, because LTL is such a hard, dynamic, capital intensive business. The union throws two big things around your neck: more costs and less like autonomy. You have more constraints, definitely. More restrictions. So LTL carriers, the private ones and the non-union public ones, they're a lot of the times, just with a head above water, treading water. Obviously, a lot are doing pretty well right now, profitability wise, but definitely. Historically, it's been 10%, 12% margins was pretty good. So you toss somebody a couple bricks, and they're going to have a really tough time staying afloat.
No, I think that's
my simpleton's interpretation.
No, that's perfect. We like the simpleton explanation on things. So let's dive into something you touched on a little bit earlier. You've got this event that's upcoming. Understand LTL. I think it's the Playbook Live. It's going to be happening in High Point, North Carolina. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, who's going to be there? What is the event? And let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to talk about that for a minute.
Absolutely.
So several months ago, I was kind of racking my brain. I had Understand LTL, built, launched. I had a course out there. The other thing I had was this group of people in the industry that I was calling the A team that had all kind of put their name behind it. And, Todd Poland, VP of Pricing at Old Dominion, Lance Healy, LTL technology pioneer and wizard, Madison Conway, a marketing genius. She's with DDC. They do, they have technology and services for LTL carriers behind the scenes. So I had all these people that kind of not bought in, but just endorsed it. Yeah. And I've been thinking of ways to harness that. There's a lot of experience and brain power and networks behind all these people. And so that, along with I thought, launching a course digitally is cool, but what if we had an in-person event that lined up with the launch of of the next course?
Yeah.
So I just thought, hey, let's start thinking about getting a small mastermind event together. My initial goal was no more than 25 attendees. And then we've got myself and 8 or 9 other of those A team members as kind of the speakers. So there's still some spots left. I'll probably have somewhere between 15 and 20 on November 9th when it starts, November 9th and 10th. It was a little more expensive than your average conference, but I wanted, it's like you're buying into a community. So if you come to the event, you also get access for you and your company to these courses. And, you get the network, you get access to a lot of really smart people and one-on-one time and just real intimate, round table discussion. So
How long is the event for? Is it one day, multi-day?
Not long enough with the number of speakers and the content, it should have been at least 2 full days. It's basically it's a dinner one evening and then it's just a full day the next day. So
that's gonna
it is
be it's gonna be
packing a little
intensive.
bit.
It's going to be intensive, but I think that's going to be, I think that's going to be interesting. And, you said it was, it's more expensive than your average event, right? But it's also not, it's not your average event. It's also a more intimate setting with these LTL leaders. You're, like you said, you're getting the courses, you have access to the group, and to be able to really dive deeper into LTL and have a lot of your questions answered. Anything that you've ever really wanted to know or need to know about LTL. Like if someone's out there listening and you're not following Curtis and you are interested in LTL, like you have to be following Curtis. And that's not just me saying that because Curtis is here. Like I plug Curtis on LinkedIn. I plug Curtis on Twitter when people ask, LTL questions. I sure as heck don't know 1% of what Curtis knows. Like he knows what he's talking about with LTL. So it's just a very interesting concept to have. There's so many truckload events, so many broker carrier events, things like that. I think that an LTL specific event like you're doing is very interesting. And now you're dropping a second course. What are your courses? What do they entail?
The first one that's been out for a year now, it's called Building an LTL Brain. And it's basically the basics, but it's not starting in the weeds and getting overwhelmed with the thousands of, classification codes and densities and all these different rules.
Right.
It's boiling it down to first principles and helping people basically build, the mental models in their head to be able to look at an LTL situation and decipher it. So I got some great feedback from somebody that took it. They had come to a 3PL from after spending a couple of years at an Amazon cross-dock, and they took the course and they're like, this opened my eyes. I didn't realize I was essentially doing a whole bunch of LTL things when I worked at Amazon on the cross-dock. And because you broke it down this way, I was consolidating and cross-docking and pooling and doing all these things. So that's cool for me to hear. Like, I don't care if people know every carrier in the market. I don't care if they know every freight class. That stuff is less important. It can be automated more and more. But I want them to understand the incentives in the market, the network effects, the actual true framework of it, and then they can apply that to their everyday work. So that's course number one. There's been about 55 people that have gone through it, and they've been from all over, carriers, 3PLs, shippers, TMS providers. Like, it's literally been everybody. The next one here is called Rate Hero, and it's specifically an LTL pricing deep dive. So that's the one that's going to be out there in 2.5, 3 weeks, coinciding with the event. And you can go and sign up for it now. You can get to it through the Understand LTL website, and there's like a wait list for people that want to get the course. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It helps me. It makes me better too. Just writing the stuff out, creating visuals. I mentioned the design aspect.
Yeah.
It makes me realize things as I'm trying to simplify it that I typically definitely take for granted.
You may have missed.
Also,
yeah,
like I rethink different concepts, and I'm like, oh, I've habitually been doing this way for 10 years. Now that I'm breaking it down and simplifying it, it actually gives me an opportunity to improve some of it too.
That's cool. I really like that. And Curtis, I just wanted, as we wrap up here, I wanted to really thank you again for coming on the show, sharing some of your LTL knowledge. I know we're recording later on a Wednesday evening, so I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you online, and where can people find the courses? And if they wanted to come to the event, how can they do that?
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks again for having me.
Definitely.
You've got, really sincere questions, and it's great having a conversation like that where it's back and forth and not just rapid fire interviewing.
Thank you.
So good job with the setting here.
Appreciate
Best
that.
place to find me, LinkedIn. Just search Curtis Garrett on LinkedIn. And then I do have a website as well for the Understand LTL business, and it's understandltl.com. So you can find through either one of those two places, you can find me.
Yeah, we will have all of Curtis's links to Understand LTL, to the LinkedIn, and to, if you want to attend his Playbook Live, we'll have all of those in the show notes, whether you're on Spotify, Apple, or on YouTube. Make sure you guys do leave a 5-star review or give us a thumbs up if you guys like today's podcast. Again, we do drop newsletters on Monday and Wednesday, thinkfreight.io. And thanks again for checking out the podcast. And Curtis, thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot, man. Good chat.